The technical group would also like to express how appalled we are at the atrocity in Pakistan, which I think is particularly horrendous in the way in which it is targeting young people in education. Taoiseach, my question today also relates to Northern Ireland, and we know the unresolved issues in terms of flags and parades and legacy issues, and now the recent ones on finances and economics. But there's one issue that's very conspicuous by its absence, and it's an issue that a number of us in the Oireachtas, both senators and TDs, have been pursuing for a number of years now, with meetings with Minister Ford, with the Secretary of State and with other authorities in Northern Ireland, and that issue relates to prisoners in Maghaberry prison. We made a number of visits to Maghaberry, and I want to stress that we are all totally opposed to violence, and our interest and engagement with the prisoners is because of our commitment to the human rights of all prisoners in whatever jurisdiction. Now, one of these issues involves strip searching, and in spite of all the advances in technology, that continues. And there are some particularly horrendous examples. For example, a prisoner in Maghaberry handcuffed to a warder in order to go to a hospital appointment. Before he left the prison, that appointment was cancelled. He's still handcuffed, but he's strip searched before he's brought back to his cell. We have other examples of prisoners who are handcuffed to warders, going out to cases in court, handcuffed the whole time, but yet they are still strip searched when they come back to prison. And I think that's one of the most degrading and humiliating experiences for any prisoner. There's other issues in relation to controlled movement, to isolation of prisoners, issues relating to healthcare and to education. And all of this led to an 18-month dirty protest by Republican prisoners. We've also met loyalist prisoners who have similar issues in relation to healthcare and in relation to controlled movement. Over the past 8 years or so, there have been investigations and reports with recommendations that were not implemented, leading to the most recent stocktake. When we visited sometime in August, there was expectations among the prisoners we met that the stocktake was going to lead to real change. We were back again about 3 weeks ago, and there's been disappointment at that stocktake, the lack of real progress on the issues. So my question is have these issues relating to prisoners and prisoner rights, have they ever been addressed at any of the meetings that have been held? And if not, will you ensure that they are addressed in the interest of a conflict-free environment, both in the prison and in society?
Thank you.
It's a good question, Deputy, and I know that you have an interest in this for quite some time. Let me confirm to you that at the plenary sessions of the discussions that we had on Thursday and Friday, the matter of prisoners' rights was not discussed, either in the plenary session or with the individual parties. But that is not to say that they weren't discussed over the last 10 weeks, either with Minister Flanagan, Minister Sherlock and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. I can't confirm that to you. But there was no discussion on these matters on Thursday and Friday. Was on the broader picture of the political issues that were there. This, of course, is an important issue in its own right. I'll have it pursued for the Deputy, both with the Minister for Foreign Affairs, first of all to confirm as to whether discussions took place in any shape or form over the last 10 weeks about this, and if not, to take it up directly through him with the Secretary of State.
There's another issue which previously had affected Republican prisoners but also affecting loyalist prisoners now, and that's on the revocation of licences. So licences can be revoked based on closed information, which makes it very difficult for that prisoner to try to defend themselves. There may eventually be a parole commissioner hearing which could be cancelled at the last moment, and if release does come eventually, it will be with very stringent conditions. That's another area. Our group is also concerned with other miscarriages of justice, similar to those suffered by the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4. And in fact, it was the late Jerry Conlon who had taken up the issue of the Craigavon 2. Now, these two men are in jail for a number of years. Despite the fact that the case wasn't proven against them, it was reliant on the word of a very dubious witness. There was contradictory and discredited forensics, and these two men are in prison for a number of years. They're going to be there for another probably 2 years while they're waiting on their case to go to the Supreme Court in the UK. And our concern is that all of these issues can't be left unaddressed because they're undermining peace and stability. And regardless of one's view on the Good Friday Agreement, nobody wants to see Northern Ireland or Ireland return to violence. So it means real engagement, real discussion and dialogue with those who disagree with the Good Friday Agreement, both Republican and loyalist, inmates because they feel abandoned and let down. And it also means a real engagement on the prisoner issues and an implementation on recommendations that are reached in agreements. So I'm asking, in the interest of peace and justice and in the interest of a fair justice and peace, that those matters will be part of any talks that are taking place with the authorities and in particular with Minister Ford and the Secretary of State.
Thank you.
I see that the Minister for Foreign Affairs answered Deputy O'Sullivan a question back in November, confirming that policing and justice powers were devolved to the Northern Ireland institutions following Hillsborough in February 2010. And since then, David Ford, MLA, has been the Minister for Justice with responsibility, and an executive agency of his department, the Northern Ireland Prison Service, is responsible for implementing prison policy there, which Deputy O'Sullivan is aware of. A comprehensive review of that was chaired by Anne Hours, and from which flowed from the Hillsborough Agreement, and that was published back in October 2011. And that review set out a path for the prison system in the North. Implementation of the 40 recommendations made by Anne Hours and her prison review team is due for completion next year, and progress is overseen by an independent group which reports every 6 months on the progress being made. She recognised that Maghaberry was unable, as you say, to meet the challenge of seeking to provide appropriate security and sufficient and relevant activity for its long and short-term prisoners, including those in prison for paramilitary offences. In the summer of 2010, Republican prisoners in Maghaberry's Row wing protested at conditions. An agreement between prisoners and prison management, known as the Row House Agreement, was concluded in August of that year, and 4 independent assessors were appointed to assist in its oversight and its delivery. And on the recommendation of the Prisoner Ombudsman, Tom McGonigal, the independent assessors carried out a stocktake of implementation of the Row House Agreement in August and September of this year. And that stocktake was published by Minister Ford on the 12th of November and highlights the areas of progress since 2010 and issues of concern to prisoners and to management. The report was based on free access to Maghaberry and to his prisoners, as well as contact with the prison authorities, the Prisoner Ombudsman and prison officer representatives, and I think that any documentation requested was made available. So the independent assessors highlight the murder of a prison officer, David Black, back in November 2012 by so-called dissident Republicans as a significant challenge and a breach of principle underlying the agreement. And there have been ongoing threats against members of the Northern Ireland Prison Service, and officials dealing with prison welfare have further complicated relations and damaged trust between the prison service and prisoners. All threats against those working in prisons and with prisoners in Northern Ireland are completely unacceptable, obviously. So the recent stocktake was accepted by the prison service and by the relevant prisoners, and it does open an opportunity to resolve outstanding matters so that the unimplemented elements of the Row House Agreement could now be put in place. The independent assessors recommend a timeline of 6 months for the resolution of the outstanding issues. Now, I'll follow that through with the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Secretary of State, and I'll advise Deputy O'Sullivan of the outcome. Thank you for your question.
That completes Leaders' Questions for today.